Ladies and gentlemen, this is huge news. New York Times Supreme Court clears way for Texas to use Republican-friendly redistricting maps. Associated Press Supreme Court allows Texas to use a congressional map favorable to Republicans. Finally, Republicans are doing the same things that Democrats have done for decades. The Democrats have been very good at gerrymandering. They are absolutely brilliant at gerrymandering. We'll get to that in a second. Hit subscribe to this channel right now, to my super chat. Thank you. This helps the GOP big time in 2026. Hit subscribe to this channel. Super chat. Thank you. Let's talk about the Supreme Court victory the last couple of hours.
Has released a ruling that now allows the new Texas redistricting maps to be used for next year's election. A big decision that Eye on Politics reporter Jack Fink has been looking for. Jack's joining us on the phone right now to talk a little bit more about this. Jack, this ruling has a lot of implications for a lot of would-be candidates that were waiting to see how this would play out, to see if they would run, if they wouldn't run, and for what districts. How is all of this sort of going to play out now, you think?
Well, look, this is a very big victory for Texas Republicans. They redrew this map. They did the redistricting mid-decade. These will give likely Republicans up to 5 new congressional seats in next year's midterm elections. And this all started when just
lost his phone collection. But again, this is a major development now in what has sort of been a very contentious debate, not just here in Texas, but really throughout the country, because this set off efforts in other states, namely California, to redistrict their maps as well, to sort of offset what would be additional Republican seats coming out of Texas. We know that California's governor, Gavin Newsom, had also proposed his own version of what the redistricting maps would look like in California. That was something that was expected to, or is still expected to, rather, to go to the voters before they can make any decision on that. But again, here locally and throughout the state, this is something that a lot of candidates were waiting on to see if, in fact, they would continue. Jack Fink is joining us on the line once again. Jack, I was just mentioning how, this sort of ruling had offset, or set off, rather, other efforts in other states, namely California, to try and offset the seats here. But you were talking about how this is a major win for Texas Republicans.
Yes, that's right. And so the 2025 congressional maps are definitely now in place. This is basically the Supreme Court saying that Texas is correct. The state had obviously appealed the lower court ruling from the judges in El Paso, who found that
So the Supreme Court overruled, yet again, a lower court. This happens all the time. To my super chat, thank you. Paul Bartlett, thank you so much. Check this out. This was before the Supreme Court ruling. This is when a panel of judges in Texas, federal judges, stated, no, you can't. Governor Abbott and Texas Republicans can't redraw congressional maps to add more GOP seats. Of course, the Supreme Court, 93.7, almost 94% of the time, sides with President Trump. Why is that? Let's continue. Check this out.
Raging on, one member of a 3-judge panel issued a scathing dissent after his colleagues voted to block the redrawn congressional maps out in Texas. It reads in part, quote, "In my 37 years on the federal bench, this is the most outrageous conduct by a judge that I have ever encountered. Judge Brown's injunction turns the Texas electoral and political landscape upside down. It creates mayhem, chaos, misinformation, and confusion." So let's bring in Texas's Governor Greg Abbott. Sir, thank you for taking time with us today. Here is what that judge was dissenting from. This is the majority ruling. The 2 judges here wrote, "To be sure, politics played a role in drawing the 2025 map, but it was much more than just politics. Substantial evidence shows that Texas racially gerrymandered the 2025 map."
And of course, the Supreme Court disagreed. As always, almost 100% of the time, the Supreme Court overturns federal courts. when it comes to Trump and when it comes to what Republicans have been doing. Why is that? So 94% of the time, the Supreme Court sides with Trump, yet Trump is the despot. Right.
What do you say, sir?
Well, first of all, with regard to that statement, there was actually zero evidence of any racial judgment playing any role in the decision-making process. But Jillian, know this also, that Judge Brown, who wrote that opinion, he was just reversed last year in a different redistricting decision. He was wrong last year. He's wrong this year. The senior judge you were pointing out, Jerry Smith, he was the only person on that panel from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. He was exactly right. He's never seen, and I have never seen a judgment, an opinion so erroneous in its writing. And it looked like Judge Brown geared his writing to try to achieve a result. And that's something that the United States Supreme Court, I think, is just not going to tolerate.
Okay. So it's going to maybe move up the chain in the judiciary, it sounds like. Take a look at this, sir. I want to get your response. We know that you have now designated 2 organizations, CARE and the...
So this is, again, before the Supreme Court ruling today. This is Governor Abbott stating categorically that it is constitutional. What they did was allowed by the Constitution, and the Supreme Court backed him today.
Meantime, in the Texas redistricting fight, as a federal court blocks the state's newly redrawn congressional map for now, potentially setting up a legal showdown.
The federal court has stopped this Texas redistricting map from going forward.
Yep.
Is this going to backfire?
Supreme Court of the United States will have a final word.
A 3-judge panel declaring a new map to add 5 GOP districts in Texas is racially gerrymandered, a claim that Texas is adamantly denying.
The state is fighting back, planning to file an appeal with the Supreme Court, and a ruling from the High Court could have national implications with redistricting fights underway in several states.
Molly Hemingway will join us on this in just moments.
But we begin with Brooke Taylor. She is live in Dallas. Brooke, to you.
Hi, Molly. Well, this decision was made by 3 federal judges, including Trump appointee Judge Jeffrey Brown, who voted in favor of blocking this GOP map, so going against the president here. In this 160-page filing, Judge Brown said, quote, "Politics played a role in drawing the 2025 map, but it was much more than just politics. Substantial evidence shows that Texas racially gerrymandered the 2025 map. Earlier this year, President Trump pushed Texas Republicans to redraw its congressional map in order to help the GOP keep their slim majority in the 2026 midterms. Now, on the left here, you have the map that was passed in 2021. So that's the old map.
And if Democrats could do that, they would do that. But there's no room for gerrymandering. So with Prop 50 in California, you'll hear Abbott in a second. If Newsom wants to add 5 more seats, Abbott could do the same thing and add 10 more seats. Let's continue.
And on the right, this is the redistricting map that was passed earlier this year. It was aimed at flipping 5 Democratic House seats to Republican. Now, Democrats, you might remember, they fled Texas, staking out in blue cities for 2 weeks to try and block this vote. This sparked a nationwide redistricting battle across the country. In retaliation, California voters passed a ballot measure led by Governor Newsom to also redraw its districts. There's now questions about what this ruling is going to mean for his state.
Do you think if this was blocked in Texas that it might be blocked in California with the Prop 50 that just passed there?
You know, it would be fair. It would make sense if you're going to do it to one state, you do it to another state.
Planning to publish your...
And Governor Abbott, meanwhile, slamming this decision, saying it had nothing to do with race. Quote, "The legislature redrew our congressional maps."
And the Supreme Court agreed.
To better reflect Texans' conservative voting preferences and no other reason. Any claim that these maps are discriminatory is absurd and unsupported by the testimony offered during the 10 days of hearing. Now, Texas is now going to appeal to the Supreme Court. A lot weighs in the balance here with Republicans' majority in jeopardy for this coming midterm elections, Molly.
All right, Brooke Taylor, thank you. John?
All right, from one Molly to another, let's bring in Molly Hemingway, a Fox News contributor. We've just got an abundance of Mollys today. So Ken Paxton, Attorney General of Texas, is going to be taking this to the Supreme Court. But there's questions as to whether the Texas court ever had jurisdiction to hear this in the first place. There were a pair of cases back in the late 2010s. This one, it surrounded Rucho v. Common Cause. It was about gerrymandering in North Carolina. The Supreme Court majority, written by John Roberts, said, "We conclude that partisan gerrymandering claims present political questions beyond the reach of the federal courts. Federal judges have no license to reallocate political power between the two major political parties. What the appellees in dissent seek is an unprecedented expansion of judicial power. We have never struck down a partisan gerrymander as unconstitutional, despite various requests over the past 45 years. I mean, if you listen to that, and then there was another case out of Maryland where the Supreme Court found that gerrymandering was non-justiciable, you wonder, where's this going to go?
So that's why these two members on this three-member panel are trying to say that it's not partisan, that the Republicans in the Texas legislature were not doing this for partisan reasons. They're saying they did it for racial reasons, because then it would be able to be reviewed by their court. But it's kind of a difficult case to make. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a long opinion, but it's going to be difficult to see how that goes when it gets to the Supreme Court level, in part because the facts of the case do seem to indicate President Trump asked the Texas legislature to give him 5 more seats for political gain. They said, we'll do that for political gain. You have the testimony of the person who drew the district saying, I did this to maximize Republican gains. And so then the court is saying, no, actually.
And so that is constitutional. Democrats have done that in Illinois, every blue state, New York, California. They've done that everywhere they could. There are no extra seats for them to gerrymander anymore. They were brilliant at it. They're so much better at lawfare and this type of politics than Republicans have been. And now Republicans are doing the same thing. And of course, Democrats think it's unconstitutional. But the Supreme Court sides with Trump 94% of the time.
Actually, they did it for racial reasons. That's something that might be not seen as holding under scrutiny when it gets to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Tommy, thank you for the super chat. Thank you so much. Paul, thank you, as always. Thank you, Tommy. Thank you, Paul.
That dog may not hunt when it finally comes to the Supreme Court. Meantime, California Governor Gavin Newsom is positively crowing about this. He put out on X, Donald Trump and Greg Abbott played with fire, got burned, and democracy won.
And as always, a bit premature. Premature as always, the wonderful, morally superior Democrats, the Supreme Court backed Trump and democracy won.
This ruling is a win for Texas and for every American who fights for free and fair elections. It could be, though, if this does hold up in court, a brief victory for Gavin Newsom, because if it's not the right thing to do in Texas, how could it be the right thing to do in California?
Yeah, so it's different cases, but it's a similar situation in that the DOJ has said that California did use too much race in their redistricting in California. Now, again, we've got Supreme Court precedent saying you have to separate out race from politics. Mm-hmm. Those things tend to overlap quite a bit, though. People of certain racial groups tend to vote in groups, and so it can be difficult to do. But it does show, really, how much better Democrats have been at maximizing their congressional districts relative to Republicans. You have states that have, 40, 45% Republicans with no representation in Congress. And the Republicans tend to, they're starting this game a little bit more, but they are well behind, decades behind where Democrats have been. And you can also see the tenacity with which people like Newsom are willing to push it even further.
So the president has been encouraging other states like Indiana to follow along the redistricting path. But one opponent of that is the California Republican Representative Kevin Kiley, who suggests that this idea of having a gerrymandering war really is a fool's errand. He said, quote, "This is why the only if Texas does it trigger was removed from Prop 50. California's gerrymander will stand even if the Texas map falls. If only someone had warned."
But that is a a Republican in California. Okay, the Supreme Court just backed Texas. And so if California, Abbott has already stated that California wants to add 5 more districts, he could add 10 more Republican seats, or he could add something like 10 more Republican seats.
Warned that a redistricting war was utterly foolish. So if Texas had not done this, California wouldn't have done it. And if Texas falls and California stands, that could easily flip the balance of power in the House.
Again, if you look only at the last year, that's a very good argument. When you look at the last few decades of what has happened with redistricting, again, you have Democrat-controlled legislatures in Democrat-majority states that have really gone almost to the limits of what they can do. Republicans, again, just haven't done it anywhere near where they could, even in states that they control or have supermajorities in. So some people can argue that it was all done by this trigger, but other people could say, unless you have mutually assured destruction, it will just continue to be an unfair situation for Republican voters.
So quick prediction on what the Supreme Court will do.
They have been clear that there are multiple problems with how this case has gone with cases like this, including you're not supposed to nullify a map in the middle of an election, and Texas is right now having qualifying rounds for the next election. So there are multiple grounds on which they might not like this interim decision.
We'll see where it goes. It should get to the Supreme Court pretty quickly, I would think.
Yes.
Molly.
So this is Governor Abbott.
I asked Governor Abbott about this case during a political event in Frisco yesterday. How confident are you that the Supreme Court is going to rule in the state's favor? And what is your reaction to the fact that the majority opinion, the ruling, said that Texas used racially gerrymandered these maps?
There was zero evidence that any map drawing decision was made based upon race. The only people who were eligible to even be able to submit evidence on that were the members of the legislature whose intent was the only intent that mattered about what was contained in those maps. And to a person, everyone from the legislature who testified said race played no role whatsoever. It was all about politics, which is legal. Second, know this. The judge who wrote that opinion was just reversed last year by the Federal Court of Appeals in that judge's last decision about redistricting. He got that redistricting decision wrong. He got this one wrong also. I feel very confident the Supreme Court is going to take this case and once again overturn Judge Jeff Brown for a wrong ruling on redistricting.
And that is exactly what happened. Now Abbott on what he'll do if Newsom passes 50.
This morning, Governor, great to have you here. Thank you so much. How would you take these Democrat districts out of your state?
So first of all, one reason why this even exists is because of the gross gerrymandering that's already been done by California, Illinois, New York, Massachusetts, and so many Democrat states. What Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, is threatening, and that is if Texas goes through with redistricting that eliminates 5 Democrat seats and aligns our congressional delegation with the values of the state of Texas, he says that he will work toward eliminating 5 Republican seats in California. And I'm saying that if he tries to do that, we have the capability using the same strategy that they're using in California to eliminate in Texas not just 5 seats of Democrats, but in fact 10 seats of Democrats. Yeah. And so
again, that's still Republicans still make out 5 more seats even with Prop 50 if Abbott responds to Prop 50.
Here's what we know to oversimplify this, and that is before Texas is working to redraw the congressional lines in the state of Texas, California, Illinois, and New York, they've gone to extremism with regard to drawing lines that eliminate Republicans from the congressional delegations in their states, and they have run out of bullets and will not be able to make any further changes in the future. Right. But Texas and other Republican states will be able to make our states have larger Republican delegations in Congress.
Well, they wrote the book on gerrymandering, and to your point, they got no room left to go in the blue states, so it's not a winning proposition for them. But I want to get to this issue. You've issued warrants for Democrats who have fled the state. We've been following that.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Governor Abbott explaining why there was redistricting in the first place.
Republicans defended this map for years.
Sure. And as they rightly should have, because the map that was drawn before this recent court decision that said coalition districts were not required. And the map, I believe, as drawn, could be upheld. That said, we're no longer compelled to have coalition districts. And as a result, we can draw maps not have coalition districts, and through that process maximizing the ability of Texans to be able to vote for their candidate of choice. And listen, one thing about this also, and that is this is a national-based issue. Don't think that Texas is the only state that's doing this. Texas is the first in line because our primaries are earlier. Our filing deadline is a few months away here in December. There are other states that are Democrat states across the country where their election process begins much later, who have been talking about doing this very same thing. So this is a national-based issue as well.
You mentioned national. There's been criticism of you saying you're letting President Trump call the shots.
Listen, people are always going to lodge criticisms. I'm not worried about stuff like that. What I'm worried about is making sure that we are going to have congressional districts in the state of Texas, where Texas is going to be represented in Washington, D.C., in ways that fit the structure of this recent court decision that allows Texas to draw these districts that also maximize the ability of Texans to be able to vote for their candidate of choice.
Lastly on this topic, President Trump says he thinks he can pick up 5 Republican seats in Texas. Doesn't that signal that Republicans are a little bit nervous about the midterms?
So what we're focused on is not what may happen in the midterms. We're focused on making sure that we draw maps in the state of Texas that will maximize the ability of Texas residents across the state to be able to vote for their candidate of choice.
Let's talk about the flood.
Sure.
I keep saying.
So again, if it's legal and constitutional, why can't Republicans add more seats? Democrats did the same thing. I mean, there's issues with the census also, that the census is not accurate. But let's continue. And again, this is if it's constitutional, why not? Then, and we're not even talking about Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act when the Supreme Court overturns that as unconstitutional today for 2025, and then overturning Trump conviction in New York. The Supreme Court's going to continually side with President Trump. Thank God. And if the rebuttal is, there's conservatives on the Supreme Court, okay, the federal judges that ruled against Trump are by and large Democrats or lifelong Democrats or nominated to the bench by Democrats. So, I mean, you can say the same thing. It is what it is. You cheated Bernie Sanders in 2016, Democrats. You lost 2016. That was 3 Supreme Court justices that Democrats did that to themselves with a primary where they cheated a candidate. And then they had a secret server scandal with top secret intel. Then Comey wrote a Comey letter, and then they blamed Russia, even though they wanted to elevate Trump in their own emails. Thank God Trump won. But, if they want to talk about a partisan Supreme Court, you better also talk about partisan federal judges and partisan judges in New York that went after Trump. So, I mean, that argument goes both ways. So.
Story of the day, Texas state lawmakers are set to reconvene Friday. The House, it remains frozen, failing to meet a quorum for the second day as Democrats have fled in order to block redistricting. This all started because Democrats are looking to defend current districts like this, Texas 35. That district was ruled unconstitutional, drawn with discriminatory intent until ultimately deemed allowed by the Supreme Court. With threats against their cling to power, though, Democrats are screaming all-out war.
This is unconstitutional. This is about standing up for people's voting rights and standing up for black and brown people who are going to be iced out. Would the state of California?
Trump almost won the Latino vote. The Democrats, they're losing that paradigm or that political talking point. Just because you're a certain demographic doesn't mean you have to vote Democrat. Democrats are losing traditional voters within demographic groups that have traditionally voted only Democrat. They're losing that every single day, every single second, every single month, every single year to Republicans. Anyway, let's continue.
Move forward in kind, fighting, yes, fire with fire.
This is not the Democratic Party of your grandfather, which would bring a pencil to the knife fight. This is
actually the Democratic Party of your grandfather, a lot better political party, did a lot more good for the country than today's Democratic Party. Your grandfather's Democratic Party was a billion times better than today's Democratic Party. Hey, let's continue.
A new Democratic Party. We're bringing a knife to a knife fight, and we are going to fight fire with fire.
That was, among others, Governor Gavin Newsom of California, Governor J.B. Pritzker of Illinois. But joining me now is Governor Greg Abbott of Texas. Governor, great to have you here on the show. You heard the reaction there from some of your fellow governors. What do you say?
Some very rich hypocrisy on their part. There are no states more gerrymandered than California and Illinois and New York. In Illinois, I think they may have maybe 3 congressional seats for Republicans, despite the fact that Trump won more than 40% of the vote there. Same thing applies in states like California and New York. I don't think those states can gerrymander any more than they have. What Texas is doing, actually, we are drawing districts to provide every voter in the state the opportunity to cast a vote for the party and candidate of their choice. 4 of the 5 districts we're drawing, they're going to be Hispanic districts. They happen to be Hispanic Republican districts. One is going to restore the Barbara Jordan district in Harris County, Texas. And so what Democrats are really concerned about, if you look under the hood, is the fact that Hispanics and even black voters are voting more for Republicans than they have for Democrats in the past. The results of President Trump's electoral victory prove that. You have a map up, and it's a map of districts, but the fact of the matter is, if you look at the map of the presidential election, you'll see all across the border counties, President Trump won those counties, which are heavily Hispanic counties. Hispanics now vote Republican, and Democrats are losing it because of that.
Let's talk about the Democrats who have fled the state of Texas for a moment, Governor. On Sunday, you suggested they could, citing an attorney general opinion, be arrested and replaced for abandoning their office. Earlier today, I spoke to Representative Oliverson here in Texas, and he made me aware, which I was not aware, that some of the Democrats who are not showing up for a quorum are actually still here in the state. So is it the case that you could actually arrest those representatives and bring them back to Austin to establish a quorum?
So that is correct. And Will, as we're talking right now, Texas Department of Public Safety officers are on the streets looking for those Democrat House members to arrest them and to take them to the Texas Capitol and hold them there until a quorum is reached.
All right. And then in that May, I'm not sure how many. Can you tell me how many different representatives that we're talking about are in the state of Texas? I believe you're 6 short right now of a quorum. Would that number bring you to a quorum?
So that's a fact that we don't know yet. We don't know which Democrats.
So this is when Democrats left the state. They just, left the state in typical wonderful, morally superior fashion in protest, which how you win re-election doing that, I don't know. Why would you want a representative that leaves the state in protest, goes to, let's say, if a Republican did that, that would be terrible. That would be embarrassing, shameful. Oh, we're going to leave and go to Arkansas or go to Alabama or go to Texas or go to Florida or go to any other red state. Does that make any, that would never happen with today's Republican Party. But it happened with Democrats, and media didn't care. Democrats didn't. Nobody cared. Nobody made any jokes. Jimmy Kimmel didn't make any jokes, but you better believe he'd make endless jokes if Republicans did that.
Democrats remain in the state who are not yet identified. We don't know exactly how many are out of state, but know this also, Will, and that is the Texas Department of Public Safety is also working with officials in other states to find ways in which we can try to arrest the Texas Democrat members in other states and bring them back to the state of Texas.
Well, that was my.
So, ladies and gentlemen, Supreme Court backs Trump yet again in the redistricting fight, and Abbott and Texas overturns a federal court, as always. Hit subscribe, be here for it. I'm going to do 2 uploads a day on this channel and a live stream in the evening, and we'll get H.A. Goodman's other channel rolling again. We'll start tomorrow again. It's just tough to get a new channel rolling. But anyway, hit subscribe to my super chat. Thank you so very much, as always. See you tomorrow. Check the channel during the day for the upload.